Hi, my name is Michael Weitzman, and I'm an Olive Crest alumni. So I was born when my mom was 18 years old, and when I was born, we didn't really know who my father was because of some of the choices that my mom made growing up. And in that pregnancy process, there's a lot of allegations that alcohol and drugs could have been involved, and plenty of different guys. And after she had me, she continued down that path and had her next child, Demetrius. And when Demetrius was 3 months old and I was 1 year old, Demetrius passed away suddenly from sudden infant death syndrome, which is essentially where you suffocate in your sleep. And when that happened, when my brother passed away, the police came to take me away from the home. And so when the police came to get me from the house, they found me home alone, sitting on the kitchen floor with a knife in my hand. And that day they put me into the Department of Children and Family Services. And so I essentially became a foster kid when I was a year old. And so over the next year and a half, until I turned 2.5 years old, I lived in 6 different homes. But where I began to understand more of my story is when I got to my 6th home. I lived with my biological grandfather, and for the 2.5 years that I lived with him, there was a lot of physical and sexual abuse that took place. And I'm so blessed that I don't remember all of those things that took place, but I definitely remember things as a child growing up that I did remember and that I did allude to happening when I used to live with him. And so at that point, when I was 5 years old, I'd lived with him for 2.5 years. My social worker, for some reason, decided to remove me from the home, which was such a blessing because, come to find out, he was in the process of trying to adopt me. It was perfect timing. She took me away when I was 5 years old, and I went to my 7th foster home, and I was there for 2 weeks. And after that home, I went to my 8th foster home where I was adopted. When I was adopted in my 8th home, I finally felt that my prayer request for a mommy and a daddy had been answered. I believed that I was in a home now where I was loved and truly appreciated and part of the family. I was the youngest of 6 kids. My parents had 2 of their own children and then adopted 3 more before me. They adopted 2 from Korea and then 1 from Russia, and then they got me from the system. And so yeah, it was an incredible home and an extreme answer to prayer, and I'm continuously thankful that I was always provided for. But no matter how much I was provided for, I can always remember something missing from that prayer request being answered for me. And so growing up, I struggled with that emotional attachment to my parents, and I didn't have the complete relationship with my parents that most children around me had. And as a result of that, there was a lot of rebellion on my side of the relationship, a lot of anger, and I didn't feel like I was being shown the love that I needed to be receiving. And so as I continued to grow older, a situation came up in the family where, as a result of it, my parents thought it best to have me removed from the home. When I left my adoptive family, I just remember being so broken and so hurt, being 15 years old and wondering what happens now. I remember arriving at my next home, my 9th one. It was a residential facility, and I stayed there for 2 weeks and then went off to the 10th place. And it was some sort of residential facility that I lived in for 3 months. And I lived with 14 boys and 14 girls. And if I'm honest, this is probably one of the most horrific parts of my story. I remember it being so traumatic for me while I was in it, and even thinking back to it definitely brings up some weird emotions. When I lived there, there was consistently fights every single day between all the kids. I remember watching girls steal scissors from the staff's desk and slit their wrists in front of all of us, and walk around the halls with open wounds on their arms. I had a roommate who poured his own feces over my face twice in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. There were bars over the window. Everything was locked. I just remember feeling like I was in prison. It was terrible, and I couldn't remember ever being able to say, it gets better after this. I thought that this is where it ended, or it just got worse from there. And I remember looking out that barred window at 15 years old and looking at the freeway and looking at everybody driving by, thinking to myself, everyone's free except me. And I didn't dare ask God at that point, God, give me something better. I didn't dare to think that there would ever be a period of my life that would come that would be better than the situation I was in right now. When I left the residential facility that I was living at in Long Beach, I went and moved to a group home with an incredible organization named Olive Crest. And I lived at 2 of their homes for a total of 2 years. They were my 11th and 12th homes. And while I lived with Olive Crest, man, I was provided with consistency, a nurturing environment, unconditional love. I was able to graduate high school at 16 years old with my diploma. I got my first, second, and third jobs. But beyond everything that Olive Crest was able to do for me, probably the most important thing they did was match me with a mentor. You know, when I travel and speak now, I tell people all the time that relationships are what hurt us the most, but they also heal us the most. And it's because of Olive Crest and having that mentor that I could truly believe what I tell people. I was provided with a mentor named Chris, and he continued to see me for the 2 years I lived with Olive Crest. And when I was near my 18th birthday, wondering what was going to happen when I transitioned out of Olive Crest care, I was scared. I was terrified, actually. And so I remember sitting at breakfast with him one morning, and I said, you know, Chris, I trust God and I believe that all of this is under control, but I'm scared. I'm terrified, and I don't know what's going to happen when I turn 18. And his father owns a company in Oklahoma, and he said, well, if you want, you can move to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my dad could set you up with a job and a place to live, and we could figure it out, and you can become an adult and start a life out there. And so I said, sure. It was the only thing that I knew that I had at the time, and I'm so grateful that I said yes. Within 6 days, Olive Crest, everybody involved in my story, said yes to me going, and my mentor's father paid for my one-way ticket to Tulsa. Since moving to Tulsa, life has been nothing but exceptional. It's been a whirlwind of so many great events. I worked for my mentor's company for a little bit more than a year, and in the summer of 2015, went on my first mission trip for 2 weeks to Quito, Ecuador. And when I came back, I fell in love with the country, and I wanted to go back. And so in 2016, from January to July, I lived in Ecuador as a long-term missionary, advocating against child labor and against prostitution in the red light district, and participating in art campaigns all throughout the city to help people experience freedom in their lives. When I came back from Ecuador, I started my own company at 19 years old, and now I also travel to speak and share my story throughout the U.S. For foster agencies and adoption agencies, and I also speak at different churches to talk about how great God has been in my life and the hope that is possible for anybody out there.